Almighty God, who in thy infinite wisdom and providential goodness has appointed the offices of rulers and councils for the welfare of society and the just government of man, we beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor as thy servant, whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of such important trusts in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Let thy blessing descend upon us here in this Parliament assembled, and grant that we may, as in thy presence, treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the good of those whose interests thou hast committed to our charge, all which we ask in the name and for the sake of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that under item 8, which is public business, government business motion, sub-item Roman numeral 3 becomes sub-item Roman numeral 1. And sub-item Roman numeral 1 now becomes Roman numeral 3. And rest of items be renumbered accordingly, and those changes shall form part of the order paper.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that sub-item Roman numeral 3 becomes sub-item Roman numeral 1, and sub-item Roman numeral 1 now becomes Roman numeral 3, and the rest of the items be renumbered accordingly. And those changes shall form part of the order paper. Those in favor? Those against? The motion has passed.
Obituary and congratulatory remarks. Confirmation of minutes.
I beg to move that the minutes of the meeting on Monday 16th and Tuesday 17th December 2024 be confirmed as circulated.
Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the minutes of the meeting on Monday 16th and Tuesday 17th December 2024 be confirmed as circulated. Those in favor? Those against? Minutes is confirmed as circulated. I received a letter from the Honorable Prime Minister seeking approval to be absent from the House this morning because he's attending, he's out of state on business. I also received a letter from the Honorable Kozia Frederick, who is attending a personal matter out of state. And then I received a letter from the Honorable Jesma Paul seeking permission to dress not in line with the Parliament because she has an injury on her feet. So permission is granted to all. We may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at a later stage of the proceedings, I will be taking the second and third stages of the bills shortly entitled Registration of Electors Act 2024, House of Assembly Elections Act 2024, and Electoral Commission Act 2024, standing in the name of the Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Investment and Governance on the order paper. be presenting to the House for debate and, hopefully, passage during the course of this meeting. Mr. Speaker, this meeting of the Parliament marks a momentous occasion in the political and developmental history of Dominica. It marks the fulfillment of the sweat and aspirations of the Dominica Labour Party government and the many right-minded citizens, residents, and friends of Dominica of all political and other persuasions. Each, in their own way, Mr. Speaker, has contributed to the nation's arrival at this important point. Some have contributed as electoral observers, some as commentators, some as opinion providers, commissioners, some as combinations of these, and some, of course, as politicians and parliamentarians, and some in other forms. The government has full confidence that with the introduction of the voter ID cards and the confirmation process, together with the increased investigative powers given to the Chief Registering Officer and electoral officials, the bill before the House today will achieve these desired objectives. Mr. Speaker, in order to better understand where we are today, it is necessary to have some understanding of where we have come from and what we have had to endure and overcome as a country on this journey. Mr. Speaker, all citizens, residents, and true patriots and friends of Dominica are aware of the consensus that has broadly existed for the modernization and reform objectives of 1, mandatory issuance and use of identification cards for the purpose of voting, 2, cleansing the register of electors, that is to say, removing the names of ineligible electors. Mr. Speaker, many will recall the dark day in May 2017 when opposition obstructionists massed outside the precincts of the Parliament, threatening violence, and caused the premature adjournment of the Parliament and debates on the electoral modernization legislation in the form of the Registration of Electors Amendment Bill 2017 and the House of Assembly Elections Amendment Bill 2017, which were to be debated on that day. These bills had been vetted and received the stamp of approval by international electoral experts. The government, in an effort to resolve the impasse at that point, acceded to the opposition demands to remove the proposed new sections 57 and section 57A and B, which the opposition claimed sought to legitimize bribery and treating from Clause 7 of the House of Assembly Elections Amendment Bill of 2017. Thereafter, Mr. Speaker, in August of 2018, Friday the 31st of August, the government published new Registration of Electors Amendment Bill 2018 and the revised House of Assembly Election Amendment Bill 2018, from which Section 57A and Section 57B, the clauses which were complained of, were removed. Mr. Speaker, in the immediate aftermath of the government's publication of these new bills, it was pleasing to hear the then leader of the opposition, Mr. Leonard Linton, in a news interview with a local radio station, publicly Mr. Speaker, now good and will work for the benefit of upgrading the legislation to the new environment where we'll be voting with ID cards and so on, close quotes. Mr. Speaker, that quotation speaks for itself. The 2018 amendment bills were declared by the then leader of the opposition to be good and to be able to work for the benefit of Dominica having an effective electoral system. Regrettably, Mr. Speaker, Shortly thereafter, the gentleman, Mr. Linton, lost that honesty and reverted to his former type, to attacking the bills and the government's efforts to effect electoral reform in Dominica. We have, since that point in time, been on a continuous path of dispute and contention, Mr. Speaker, which has led us to this point where today we are able, despite the concerted machinations, allegations, and outright falsehoods of those who seek to denigrate and claim that the government is opposed to electoral modernization, we are at the point, Mr. Speaker, where today is irrefutable proof that the Dominica Labour Party government is the first and only government in the history of Dominica, not merely to take proactive steps to review Dominica's electoral system and laws, but even more significantly, Mr. Speaker, to actually cause revised electoral reform or modernization legislation to come before the Parliament. Mr. Speaker, the legislation has been drafted on the initiative of the government. It has been submitted to the Electoral Commission for its scrutiny and comment in keeping with Section 51 of the Constitution of Dominica. It is now, Mr. Speaker, before the House, having gone through all of the lawful, legally required steps to be debated, and I trust, passed in this House. I even trust, Mr. Speaker, that we will manage during the course of these proceedings to have unanimous support for these bills. As part of the government's efforts to bring about effective and meaningful electoral modernization, Mr. Speaker, the government has pursued various avenues to secure support and technical assistance along the way. These have included obtaining technical support from the Commonwealth Secretariat in the form of on-island electoral experts and consultants who have reviewed and advised on the electoral system in Dominica as a whole and on specific reforms. The government has also secured the attendance in Dominica of a joint special Organization of American States, CARICOM, and Commonwealth mission. Members will recall that a few years ago. The government has conducted numerous consultations and town hall meetings island-wide, has participated in national radio programs through the Attorney General and other government officials, has engaged the services of Sir Dennis Byron, the illustrious legal luminary and former Chief Justice of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, former President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, and former President of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, with the mandate to review and make recommendations for the electoral modernization and reform of Dominica's electoral laws and systems. That engagement was in 2020, Mr. Speaker. We've also had the participation of the Attorney General and other government officials on electoral panels and engagement of the government with local NGOs. All, Mr. Speaker, with a view to ensuring that Dominica gets the electoral reform that it requires. So, Mr. Speaker, what does the Registration of Electors Bill 2024 propose? The bill will significantly improve the electoral system, its processes, and electoral legislative framework in the Commonwealth of Dominica. The existing Registration of Electors Act, Chapter 203 of the 2017 Revised Laws of Dominica, was enacted as long ago as 1974, Mr. Speaker. It is therefore clear that some updating is long overdue. The core principles enshrined in and underpinned by this Registration of Electors Bill, Mr. Speaker, are: 1, the right to vote, the proper interpretation and relevance of residents in relation to the right to vote, and, Mr. Speaker, the introduction of mandatory requirement for issuance and use of identification cards for the purpose of voting. And lastly, but by no means least, Mr. Speaker, the introduction of the requirement for electors to confirm their desire for their names to remain on the register of electors, should they wish that to be the case. Before considering the provisions of the bill, Mr. Speaker, it is important to highlight and speak briefly upon those matters that I have just referred to. The first of which is the right to vote, which many who claim to be champions of the people ignore and try to suppress. Mr. Speaker, the right to vote is enshrined in Section 33, 2B of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Dominica, and is so important that the constitutional provision which provides for that protection must, in my view, be read into the record. Section 33, subsection 2B, insofar as is material to these proceedings, states as follows, Mr. Speaker. Every person who is registered, as aforesaid, in any constituency shall, unless he is disqualified by Parliament from voting in that constituency in any election of representatives, be entitled so to vote, in accordance with the provisions of any law in that behalf. Mr. Speaker, it is clear from that provision of the Constitution that every person duly registered in Dominica to vote is entitled unless he or she is disqualified by Parliament, not by voices, but by Parliament. The existence and force of this right is crystal clear, Mr. Speaker, and is articulated in the following judgments delivered by Commonwealth courts. The first of which, Mr. Speaker, I shall refer to is the Supreme Court of Canada, in its seminal judgment in the case of Suave and Canada, the Chief Elections Officer, a 2002 case, in which that court recognized and reflected the constitutional right when it held that, and I quote, denying citizens the right to vote runs counter to our constitutional commitment to the inherent worth and dignity of every individual, close quotes. Similarly, in the case of August and Electoral Commission, 1999 case, the South African Constitutional Court opined that the vote of each and every citizen is a badge of dignity and of personhood. Quite literally, it says that every person counts. Mr. Speaker, thirdly, from our own jurisprudence within the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, which has similarly made clear and reinforced the paramountcy of enfranchisement. The following are three such cases, Mr. Speaker. The first is Russell Randolph and the Attorney General of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a 1995 case where the Court of Appeal held in relation to a provision in the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Constitution, Section 27 of that Constitution, which is virtually identical to Section 33 of the Constitution of Dominica. That court held as follows, and I quote, the constitutional right conferred by the section is the right to vote in the appropriate constituency. That right is granted to every citizen who is entitled. This means that although the manner of voting is statutory or customary, the right to vote is inherently constitutional. In the Antiguan court case of Quinn Leandro and Jones, a 2010 case, that court held, and I quote, the provisions of the Act governing the exercise of the right to vote may be said to have a constitutional pedigree. And thirdly, Mr. Speaker, the case of Joseph Parry and Mark Brantley, a 2012 case, the court held, it's a St. Kitts and Nevis case, the court held as follows, and I quote, In applying the law and the regulations, preference must be given to recognition of the right to vote, and the legislation must be construed in a manner which promotes enfranchisement and guards against disenfranchisement. The court went on to state that these concepts and principles, that is, those that are cited in the extraterritorial cases, apply to the states and territories of the Eastern Caribbean no less than they do in Canada and South Africa. Mr. Speaker, in that case, the court had referred to the case of Suave and the case of August, the South African case and the Canadian case, and therefore was saying in clear terms that the principles from those cases, albeit from without our jurisdiction, apply equally to our jurisdiction. These cases, Mr. Speaker, unequivocally recognize and restate the right to vote, and they debunk the misconceived and, in some instances, misguided notions being peddled by some opposition obstructionists. Mr. Speaker, I move to the issue of absence from Dominica or residence. That is a matter, Mr. Speaker, which has raised its head and is being contended by some that an elector has to be resident in Dominica to vote. Mr. Speaker, that is a fallacy. It is another misconceived notion being peddled, and which is closely associated with the issue of right to vote, which I just addressed. Mr. Speaker, this fallacy must be challenged and robustly debunked. The existing law is found at Section 7C of the Registration of Electors Act, Chapter 203 of the Dominica Revised Laws of 2017. Or if you have the earlier 1990 version, you will still find it there. And as it has generally been recognized by that provision, that the physical residence is not a requirement in order to exercise the franchise, and that it is sufficient for the elector to be or to have been present in Dominica for however long or short a time at some point during a period of 5 years, or the period of 5 years leading up to whatever point that you are considering. We all understood that, Mr. Speaker, or at least I think or thought that we all understood that. Those who wish to disenfranchise our fellow citizens, brothers and sisters living and or earning their living overseas, have sought, sometimes questionably so, to cloud the issue and deny that segment of our citizenry their right to be able to vote. Mr. Speaker, in Sir Dennis Byron's Phase 1 report, and at clause 26 of his draft registration of electors bill, that's the first document that he sent. It was an appendix. I think it was Appendix 7, the 2023 version, submitted in November of 2022. So Dennis Byron proposed a significant change to the law which would abolish the existing 5-year rule, whereby provided an elector does not remain outside of Dominica for a continuous period in excess of 5 years, he or she would retain the right to vote at any election. So Dennis's proposal would instead require an elector to be physically present in or reside in Dominica for a period of at least 90 days, or alternatively, he proposed 50 days could be substituted during the said 5-year period in order for electors living abroad to be able to vote. Mr. Speaker, the government has throughout the past several years made it absolutely clear that it will not countenance any undue disenfranchisement of electors, and in that vein and having given careful consideration to Sir Dennis's recommendations at Clause 26 of his draft Registration of Electors Bill 2023, the government is, was, and shall be of the view that adoption of Sir Dennis's proposal in that regard would likely unduly disenfranchise many Dominican citizens and was not acceptable to the government. Interestingly, Mr. Speaker, even the Commonwealth Observer Mission report on Dominica's general election of the 8th of December 2014, an outlier report which the opposition are so fond of quoting in support of their misconceived notion, acknowledges that the existing provision, that is Section 7C of the existing Registration of Electors Act, would entitle most overseas electors to vote. This is reflected, Mr. Speaker, at page 13 of that report, where it states as follows, and I quote, "The mission believes, therefore, that under existing legislation, the majority of Dominicans residing overseas would be entitled to receive a national ID card, therein allowing them to vote." Close quotes. Mr. Speaker, it is very clear from this statement that the Commonwealth Observer Mission, like the government, is of the view that an elector does not need to be resident in Dominica or in a particular polling district in order to be entitled to receive a voter identification card and to vote. And Mr. Speaker, I perhaps should take the opportunity and pause, digress from my notes to say that there is a huge distinction between the requirement to be resident in order to register to vote, which is at Section 33, subsection 2A of the Constitution, and the entitlement to vote, which arises once a person is registered, which is provided for at Section 33, subsection 2B. So, Mr. Speaker, I think it was important to make that distinction. Further, Mr. Speaker, there is also powerfully persuasive case law authority which dispels the notion of a requirement for residence or ordinary residence. And the Canadian Supreme Court case of Gillian Frank and Jamie Diong, and the Attorney General of Canada and others, a 2019 case, is authority in that regard. Interestingly, Mr. Speaker, that case concerned an identical provision to our 5-year provision. And Canada being a Commonwealth country, in its constitution and in its arrangements, appears in its legislation to have a provision which is exactly the same, which provided that if a person lived or worked outside, or use the proper language, if a person was absent from Canada for a period in excess of 5 years, he or she would not be entitled to vote. And what happened is that Gillian Frank and Jamie Diong, who had lived in, I think, one in the United States and one elsewhere for between 15 and 20 years, returned and wished to exercise the franchise in Canada and were denied the opportunity, and they challenged it constitutionally, and the court held as that it was, the court allowed the appeal and held that the 5-year absence rule was unconstitutional. The court held that once registered, a person was entitled to remain registered and to vote at elections, no matter how long he or she had resided outside of Canada. Further support for the view that residence is not a requirement to be entitled as an elector to vote is found in the following provisions actually within our legislation. At clause 7, sub 4 of the bill, that's the bill before this House, and the mirror provision at section 5.3 of the existing legislation, that's the Registration of Electors Act, chapter 203, states as follows: where an elector for a polling district has ceased to reside in that polling district, the elector shall not, on that account, cease to be qualified to be registered as an elector for that polling district until he has become qualified to be registered as an elector for another polling district. So there, Mr. Speaker, one notes that even in the provision for registration, where ordinarily residence is a requirement, Section 7(4) provides that even where a person is not living in the constituency or the polling district that they're registered for, they cannot cease to be qualified to be registered on that account. Clause 22 of the bill before this House, reflected Section 20 of the existing legislation, Registration of Electors Act, states as follows. The Register of Electors prepared under this Act and the regulations shall be conclusive on the following. A, whether or not any person registered therein was on the date of publication of the register resident at the address shown, close quotes. That is right. So, Mr. Speaker, even where a person clearly may be out of Dominica, what that provision is stating is once that person is on the register, he or she is deemed to be resident at the address shown in the register. That clearly indicates, Mr. Speaker, that residence, as is being argued for, is not a prerequisite to being entitled to vote. Mr. Speaker, moving to the issue of identification cards. That has been an issue that has knocked around and been vexing to some extent. Mr. Speaker, the government has very clearly articulated its policy position as regards the introduction of ID cards. That is to say that government has taken the position that identification cards in the context of Dominica are not strictly and in reality necessary. Reason being that our society is generally so small, and each political party, or every political party, is entitled, and if they are doing their job, will have agents acting on their behalf at the polling stations, whose job it is to identify the people who present themselves and ascertain whether they are duly entitled to engage based on the register, the list that is circulating. The government has declared it that it is really an expense that the state could really do without. However, the government's position is also that in the interest of compromise and recognizing the international trend in that direction and the various requests that have been made at various points by various missions observing our elections and others. In that vein, the government has acceded to the introduction of identification cards, but also to making them the primary source of establishing one's identification at an election for the purpose of voting. However, Mr. Speaker, the contention that identification cards with fingerprints is required and necessary in the Dominica context, the government has firmly rejected for clear and obvious reasons. I just articulated a few of them. There are many more. There is absolutely no need to insert and impose fingerprints on the populace of Dominica. In support of its position, Mr. Speaker, the government notes that the United Kingdom, with a population estimated at around 69 million, did not until very recently, I believe last year, utilize any identification cards whatsoever for the purpose of voting. 69 million people, and they were able to conduct elections that most, if not all of us in this parliament, would say have been free and fair. How can we justify that with 70 plus million? Would be great if it was million. 70 plus thousand people in Dominica, we require identification cards with fingerprint. Further, Mr. Speaker, Whilst there is no requirement for electors to present photo ID cards in order to vote in the United States, those cards do not forgive me, Mr. Speaker. In the United States does not require photo or identification cards, but instead permits voting with any document which satisfactorily establishes the elector's identity. So some people will use driver's licenses, some may use passports, some may use I'm led to understand utility bills. But the fact is, the intention is to enable not to obstruct people from voting. Similarly, Mr. Speaker, only 2 of our sister OECS and wider CARICOM countries, insofar as I have been able to ascertain, appear to require the use of ID cards which contain fingerprints or any digital imprints for the purpose of voting. And one of these simply requires a thumbprint. The evidence and accepted reality is that facial recognition, which the technology that will be available to us in Dominica will be able to process, is just as, if not more, effective as fingerprints in establishing the identity of a person, and is readily available to the Electoral Commission and Electoral Office. Mr. Speaker, I return again to that 2014 Commonwealth Observer Mission report referred to earlier. This captures the reality as it relates to the need for identification cards in Dominica for electoral purposes with the following words, and I quote, "The mission notes that within the confines of a small, close-knit society as Dominica, verifying the identity of a voter is not a major issue, a view supported the mission held by the fact that historically cases of voter fraud have not been recorded in the country," close quotes. Mr. Speaker, I've chosen to use the 2014 Commonwealth Observer Report because that is the report that I hear opposition operatives frequently referring to in support of their arguments against the electoral reform. Mr. Speaker, the issue of confirmation. Antigua and St. Kitts are the 2 jurisdictions within our region which have, in recent times, embarked upon a process of, in terms of upgrading, cleansing, however you want to describe it, the register of electors or list. Antigua chose the re-registration route. St. Kitts chose the confirmation route. Insofar as I'm aware, Mr. Speaker, clearly each jurisdiction chose the route that it considered to be most appropriate for its particular purposes. In Dominica's case, Mr. Speaker, the government has decided that the route to be pursued is the route of confirmation. That is to say, those people, those electors who are registered, they're on the list or on the register, they're duly registered, and they wish to remain on the register and to continue to be able to vote in Dominica, they will have to present themselves to the appropriate officials that the Electoral Commission will dictate, and the locations and so forth. They will need to satisfy the electoral officials that they are who they say they are. So, Mr. Speaker, if I wish to continue to be able to exercise the franchise and to vote, at the given time, I will need to present myself to an electoral official, and I will need to satisfy that electoral official that I am Levi Peter, that I reside at a particular address, that I'm registered at a particular polling station, and all the other particulars. If I fail to do so, Mr. Speaker, the law states very clearly what will happen. In short, my name will be removed from the register, and I will not be able to vote, unless, of course, I am able to re-register at some point. But, Mr. Speaker, it is a clear process that will lead
to the cleansing of the register or list, whatever term one wants to use. Why? It's very simple, Mr. Speaker. As I just said, those people whose names are on the list and they fail or refuse to attend and confirm their names on the list, those names will be removed. Those people who are dead, deceased, however you want to refer to it, they're no longer with us, they're on the other side, they cannot present themselves. So obviously their names will be removed. So I do not understand, Mr. Speaker, what the outcry and hullabaloo is against the confirmation process. But, Mr. Speaker, it's before the House. I'm sure we will hear the debate and we'll hear what people have to say if they take a different view. Mr. Speaker, we will deal with those issues as and when they arise. Mr. Speaker, the government is confident that the bill before the House today will achieve its desired objectives to the satisfaction of the vast majority of the citizens of Dominica. Mr. Speaker, I will run, I hope briefly, through some of the provisions of the bill. Structurally, the bill is divided into 6 parts containing a total of 59 sections, plus 1 schedule in the form of the Registration of Electors Regulations, which comprises some 55 regulations. Part 1 of the bill provides for preliminary provisions and contains 3 clauses. Part 2 provides for polling districts and the appointment of officers and contains 2 clauses. Part 3 provides for registration of electors and arrangements concerning the register of electors and contains 28 clauses, Mr. Speaker. Of those, I would suggest that Clause 11, which deals with the introduction of mandatory issuance and use of identification cards for the purpose of voting, is a most significant change to the existing legal framework. Between clauses 13 and 25, a number of other important matters are dealt with, including a provision for registers and lists, adoption of the existing register, establishment of a new register of electors, claims and objections, and the conclusiveness of the register. And, Mr. Speaker, one change of importance is the approach to the closure of the register upon the issuance of the writ. That is a significant change to the existing legislation. Clauses 26 to 31 provide for general matters related to registration and the register of electors. Clause 27 is a significant change requiring notice to be given to an elector before his name is deleted from the register. Part 5 makes provision for general matters, Mr. Speaker, and includes a provision which authorizes the Electoral Commission to make regulations and for the Commission to hear appeals. Clauses 38 to 48 provide for electoral offences. Clauses 49 to 54 provide for the confirmation process. And part 6 provides for various matters. Clause 55 to 59 provide for the repeal of the Registration of Electors Act, Chapter 203, which is the existing legislation. The schedule, as indicated, Mr. Speaker, consists of the regulation, and among the most significant regulations are regulations 13 to 16, which relate to the voter ID card, regulations 28 to 35, which relate to claims and objections, regulations 42 and 43, which relate to appeals to the Commission and notices in that regard, and regulations 50 to 55, which relate to confirmation. Mr. Speaker, As I approach the conclusion of this presentation, I ask, does this bill have everything that everybody would wish it to have? The answer, Mr. Speaker, is no. Does this bill have most of what most people would wish it to have? The answer, Mr. Speaker, is yes. Is this bill a significant improvement upon the existing Registration of Electors Act, Mr. Speaker? And will it significantly contribute to the improvement and modernization of the registration and electoral process in Dominica? The answer is a resounding absolutely. Mr. Speaker, as will doubtless be appreciated by right-thinking people, electoral modernization and reform is not a one-time event. Rather, Mr. Speaker, it is a continuous process which requires review, intellectual and legal rigor, fortitude and diligence to ensure that identified issues, shortcomings and improvements are appropriately addressed in a timely manner. The objective always, Mr. Speaker, being to establish and maintain an electoral system and process which is free, fair, and free from fear, and which ensures that as many people as are qualified and lawfully entitled to exercise the franchise are able to do so. Mr. Speaker, I commend this Registration of Electors Bill to this Honourable House.
The bill is before the House for debate, but before we go into the debate, I would just like to refresh members' memory and to give them directions. Sorry, my throat. Members refer to the Standing Orders 41-8, and I will read it. A member shall not read his speech except with the leave of the Speaker or Chairman, but may read extracts from written or printed papers in support of his argument and may refresh his memory by reference to notes. I'm pointing that out because I'm minded to interject if I think it's an abuse of this section. I'm minded. So I'm just giving guidance and list you members in this House, honorable members, say that I'm not following the rules. That's the rule. So I'm just pointing that out to you. And obviously the standing order was placed there for a particular reason. And I'll state one. The intention of this rule is that members should come in the House to parley, to debate, not necessarily import notes verbatim from another party. So that's why I said I may interject. But I'm just saying when I interject, I've already quoted the rules. So we cannot take a paper and come here this morning and just read the whole speech. So to get your balance, your intellectual balance, just recalibrate your thinking now before we move into the debate. We may proceed, and members, let's speak. Yes, I recognize Honorable Charles.
Which one?
Honorable Charles Pemberton. Honorable Charles Pemberton. You may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to give my unwavering support to the Registration of Electors Act 2024. And Mr. Speaker, when I say I want to explain this. I, meaning that I represent the kind and loving people of the Soufriere constituency, in which in the 2022 elections, 98% of the electors who voted gave me the mandate to speak and pass laws on their behalf in this parliament. It's free and fair elections, Dominica. So, Mr. Speaker, but before I continue, please allow me to refer to my notes from time to time.
You may. But remember, refer to your notes.
I first want to congratulate Mr. Casus Birmingham, a multi-talented son of the soil of the Soufriere constituency, who performed at Canada Got Talent last night and won the gold buzzer. Indeed, his mother Joan and his father Steve and the entire family and the entire constituency and all Dominicans are proud of him and wish him the best on his journey, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a defining moment in our history. These electoral reform bills are a significant step to put into rest the long-lasted, long-debated issue on electoral reform. So I must commend the leadership of the Prime Minister, the hard work of the Attorney General and his team, real work, Mr. Speaker, not talk, real hard work, the Ministerial Subcommittee, and the people of Dominica who participated in the public consultations and boldly expressed their views. This is for you. So, Mr. Speaker, over the decade, two fundamental issues have been raised on electoral reform. One, the bloated list or cleansing of the list. Two, voters' ID card. So, Mr. Speaker, concern number one, in the Soufriere constituency in 2022, there were 3,409 electors registered, on our voters' list, Mr. Speaker. In that election, Mr. Speaker, 1,365 people voted, and I received 1,336 votes, Mr. Speaker. And I can assure you, no dead people voted in the Soufriere constituency. The observers were there. They saw people walk in. There were agents on both from political parties, independent candidates. And they saw people walked in, voted. And when the vote was tallied, they were Dennis Charles, Dennis Charles, Dennis Charles, Mr. Speaker. And they I need to meet that Dennis Charles. As I said, 98%, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I have no qualms about cleaning the voters' list. That's fine. We have agreed to do that, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, as AG clearly explained, Part 5, Section 51 speaks to the registration, the confirmation process for electors, Mr. Speaker. There'll be confirmation centers set up in all constituencies. There is a Form 31 where a voter will be able to apply to be registered on the voters list. You have to bring your name, you have to write your name and bring proof of ID and any other documents required by the Chief Registering Officer, Mr. Speaker. So it's a very simple process, Mr. Speaker, which I had planned to read this morning, but the AG did such a brilliant job in his presentation. I don't have to go into the details, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, you'll get a receipt that you applied, and once it is deemed that you are qualified and you've met the requirements, a unique number will be generated, and a photo ID will be generated for you. A voter identification card will be generated for you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, what's the problem? Mr. Speaker, I thought that just this section, which covers one of the most debated issues, would have satisfied the opposition after all their claims of dead people voting. So why is the opposition upset? Why are they crying foul? Is it because that they believe after the confirmation process is completed in 12 months, that when they lose the next general election, they'll have nothing to cry and say? They'll have nothing, no excuse to use why they lost the election, Mr. Speaker. I'm really trying to make sense of it. I'm really trying to make it make sense, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I heard Thompson Fontaine, Dr. Thompson Fontaine, let me give you his proper title, on a press conference saying that right now they do not want the confirmation process. They want re-registration. And here why, Mr. Speaker. Here why. One, they claim that to prevent CBI citizens from voting in Dominica. And Mr. Speaker, we know that the process for registering as a voter in Dominica has not changed. The AG spoke to that, Mr. Speaker, Section 7. That you have to live in Dominica continuously for 40 days in any constituency, Mr. Speaker. 3 months, sorry, 3 months. Thanks for the correction. 3 months in any constituency, Mr. Speaker, to register to vote. So how is it possible all of a sudden we have an influx of CBI citizens on the existing voters list, Mr. Speaker? I want somebody to explain that to me, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the second reason they gave is because they want only Dominicans residing in Dominica to vote. And you heard the Attorney General, Mr. Speaker. Voting is a right of every citizen of Dominica, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, it is very dangerous for any political party to try to deprive Dominicans from their right to participate in the electoral process, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, democracy is built on a notion that every citizen has a right to participate in choosing their leaders and influencing government decisions. So, Mr. Speaker, we should be making it easier for people to participate in the process, Mr. Speaker. But the Dominican people can rest assured that the Dominican Labour Party will protect your rights. But interestingly, they always trouble in the same overseas voters to fund their legal battles and other matters, Mr. Speaker. We'll speak to that. We'll come into that, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the second most debated matter is the voter ID card. So, Mr. Speaker, Part 3, Section 11 provides for mandatory voter identification for voting, Mr. Speaker. So that is being covered by the bill, Mr. Speaker. And not only just a card with security features. It states it in the clause, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we have a biometric passport. We use a photo to do that. When you travel, Mr. Speaker, you go for immigration, photo ID. To unlock your smartphone, Mr. Speaker, facial ID. So facial recognition technology is being used in the world, Mr. Speaker. Why must Dominica regress? Go backward in fingerprinting? How can that be a major issue to stop these bills today, Mr. Speaker? Make it make sense, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I heard Lennox Linton say in a consultation to a returnee who was asking a question. He asked that, what is required to vote on election day? And Lennox Linton said to the man, if you go to the polling station and you say that I am Lennox Linton, that they will, and your name is on the voters list, they will give you a ballot to vote, Mr. Speaker. That is what he said to the gentleman. I never thought in my wildest imagination that anyone in Dominica would mistake Lennox Linton, Mr. Speaker. I never thought so it was possible. But since it is, Mr. Speaker, he should be happy to have his voters ID card, Mr. Speaker. So nobody can fraudulently vote under his name, Mr. Speaker. So it begs the question, why are they trying to stop electoral reform? Well, we'll get to that, Mr. Speaker. The Act clearly covers two major areas widely debated. But, Mr. Speaker, there's a recent move, a new slogan. It used to be, no electoral reform, no elections. Things have changed. Now it's no campaign financing, no elections. No electoral reform. That is what it is now. No campaign financing, no electoral reform. Very interesting, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, let me remind the United Workers' Party about the 2000 elections. Despite the fact that they were in government, despite the fact they went to the east to do a sun worship ceremony, despite the fact they were distributing KFC, rum, housing materials, windows, doors, stoves, fridge, microwaves, two-par-two, everywhere in Dominica, the Labour Party government won the election on integrity, love, and genuine care for the people of Dominica. So, it is not the largest purse that wins elections in Dominica, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the UWP really has no interest in the well-being of the people of Dominica. I mean, I heard Lennox Linton last Friday, and I say Lennox Linton because it's his voice I heard, on a PA system, disturbing people. He came to Point Michel after a long, hard week of work. You know, some people actually work in Dominica, resting at their homes, telling people to come and demonstrate. Demonstrate today to prevent those bills from being passed, Mr. Speaker. I don't know how you're going to stop it, because you have to be in Parliament to stop the bills from being passed. But that is what he was saying to the people, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I said to myself, upon a little reflection, where was Lennox Linton during the COVID-19 pandemic to get a PA system to go around Dominica and tell people and encourage people to take the vaccine, or even to distribute some masks, Mr. Speaker, to save lives? Very interesting, Mr. Speaker. Very, very interesting. Or the opposition functions in Dominica. Mr. Speaker, I heard they set up a GoFundMe account. I didn't know that. That is what I was told. Asking people to contribute, to donate funds, so they could buy drinks and could pay out to serve protesters today.
We don't meet.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. But that same United Workers' Party could not raise funds after Hurricane Maria to fix one house, repair one roof, buy one window, one door, or one nail for even their own supporters, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I asked ordinary Dominicans, why do they think the opposition wants to stop the modernization of democracy today? Why? And, Mr. Speaker, permit me to share what they have to say, because this is about the people. They are confusing me too. The real answer to that is they never wanted it. They were just putting a front. Can you imagine Linton was going around last evening on a pickup asking for persons to come out and protest on Wednesday morning in front of Parliament? That's just ridiculous. You're truthful. Because they have no strategy to remain relevant after reform.
Translate truthful.
All crazy, mad. They're all mad. Because they used to abuse the system to win seats. My father gave me plenty stories of them, man tricks back in the days. Because they realized that electoral reform is not the answer to their real problem. They are lacking in capacity as a political party. They never wanted reform. It was a convenient football to kick around the election time to cry foul. Getting it now means there isn't anything to be used next time around. It don't even make sense to have an opposition. They are jokers. They don't know what they want. You see how many I read? The Dominican people, Mr. Speaker. What they believe is happening here this morning, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is very clear on campaign financing. He said he has approached CARICOM for us to have harmonized legislation, Mr. Speaker. You heard the Dominican people during the consultations. Many people were confused. Many people said, no, they're not interested. Who's going to finance it? Who's going to pay? How is it going to be monitored? So we have never been opposed to campaign financing. As the AG said, we're going with what we have now. We can come back later to make amendments, Mr. Speaker. That's what happens when we pass laws in Parliament. We make amendments all the time. The other day, I brought in a maritime legislation. I had the size of the boat wrong. I had to come back, amend it. There are times you have to introduce new clauses. It happens all the time, Mr. Speaker. So why are we trying to give people the impression that when the laws pass today, that's it? Let us not manipulate our people or mislead them, Mr. Speaker. It is not right. Those who know better. So, Mr. Speaker, everybody in Dominica knows. And Mr. Speaker, I should say we are very open to campaign financing, discuss it. But everybody in Dominica knows. Everybody knows who in the 2019 elections offered diplomatic appointments for campaign funds. So, Mr. Speaker, the UWP plot to stop these bills from passing in Parliament is not about protecting democracy. It's about their own political interests, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, according to Proverbs 6, because they're quick to tell people, let's protest. Let's cause mayhem in Dominica like February 7th and all their bad behavior they have displayed to the people of Dominica as opposition or outside party, because they're not in the house, so they're not really opposition. I don't even know what they are, Mr. Speaker. But Proverbs 6:16-19 says, these 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7, an abomination to him. A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans. Mr. Speaker, I repeat that. A heart that devises wicked plans. And one who sows discord among brethren. And in the 7 things I've listed today, they must pause and think, if weighed in the balance, will they be found wanting? Mr. Speaker, the Lord God Almighty stands with the Dominica Labour Party government. So, Mr. Speaker, my final words is that I am having a bumper year in tourism. We had 34% more people this carnival than last year. The international airport is under construction. The marina is under construction. The cable car is under construction. Very soon, 21 families in the Soufriere constituency will receive their keys to their new homes, resilient homes. So, Mr. Speaker, the executive has done its part. We have brought the legislation. We have made the funds available to the Electoral Commission, over $3 million, AG told you. We have better use for funds, but we have accepted that we want to modernize our electoral system. So here we are. So the executive has done its part. The Electoral Commission is waiting for the power to do their part. So the Parliament must now do its part and pass the bill, Mr. Speaker. Pass the bill. May God bless this beautiful country and people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, I recognize you, Honorable Charles.
Yes, morning, Mr. Speaker. Morning to my colleagues in this honorable house. I rise to give a contribution on this electoral reform bills because I personally think this is the reason why we have this opposition here. Because this bill, well, this, I would say, over 17 years now, this has been an ongoing debate for the opposition and the government of the day. So, more than that, according to Mr. Blackmore. But anyway, I stand for this bill to be passed. I'm going to tell you why. Because we have to start somewhere. We have to start it somewhere. We have to give and take. And this is not about political parties showing how strong they are. This is not about the government flexing their muscle. This is about democracy. And you foresee me a little bit, but I remember it.
No,
But
you can refer to your notes.
I know.
I just don't want people to abuse the process.
Yeah.
You understand? But you can refer to your notes.
Yeah.
Honorable Charles Pemberton, you could see how she maneuvered and did it.
Yeah.
So we really need to debate in this house. So you can refer to your notes. If you are overdoing it, I won't stop you to say you won't debate, but I will point out to you and the house and the public that you are just reading.
Yeah.
So it might not be embarrassing, but I won't stop you.
Okay, let's continue. Now, when I'm going to go back a little bit to the 2 years political career that I did not aspire to be no politician. I only aspire to represent my beloved Marigot. And as much voices Marigot people can get, I only seek to get those voices. In 2019, we had some demonstration in Marigot. And when the demonstration get heated, they said, well, the opposition at the time, United Coast Party, said, let the ballot box pass. And it had some young voters that was prompt and heated to really demonstrate. And when they said let the ballot box pass, a lot of them shoulders was dropped. So when the election was called in 2022, I see especially the young voters, and certain things was breeding on the ground. Like we talking this protest and this rioting thing. So I said, I want to stand for a cause. I just come to stand because United Workers' Party stayed out. But the young people are very concerned. We need somebody to hold our hand. So I rise to the occasion to hold their hand and lead them to the right way. Because protest, yes, the educated ones, the calm ones will protest and they'll go at their home. But remember, you're leaving the ordinary man that is already agitated, is already hyped. And when they think they're just going to just lash out. So now I don't want this, especially in Marigot, because I would like to also advise the government and the opposition. This demonstrating thing is played out. Everything we need not supposed to be coming from a demonstration. The government is supposed to act more promptly, and the opposition need to do a different way to get the answers. We need to change this way of, we need to work together. It's simple. There's a different way of calling out people. These demonstrators have been destroying each other, damaging each other property. So you say, especially the young voters, I know the AG tried his best. He's nonchalant, he's slow, he's nice. But you see this section this, you see this section this and that, the ordinary man don't want to hear that. The thing what we want to hear, about talking about media access. And before this house was called, I put out a few documents to really see how the media access really gravitated. You have to go and pay DBS. DBS maybe have 5 followers, nobody will follow DBS. The media access, you have to create your own access. The Honorable Blackmore told me he saw my release. I wonder how he saw it. That means the media access is accessible to anybody. Put it out there and he will see it. Once whatever you put out there is making sense, the media is going to call you. DBS called me. Because what you're putting out there, once it's making sense and it is good news, they will ask for it. So this thing about going to pass legislation and pass laws to make leader, put political thing on it, they're not making no sense. Create your own media, everybody on Facebook, everybody on Twitter, everybody on Instagram, everybody on everything. Why must you want to force a legislation to make media put things on things? That don't make no sense. Now, when it comes to searching, you see these books here? You see, I don't know if it's because of how I grew. You see these books here? These old colonial laws? They need to reform. They need to be reformed. So the AG, after this is said and done, we need to take each other book, take them together, throw them outside, and then watch one by one and bring them back inside. Because these books need to change, because we need to move with the globalization and the changes of the international world and everything. We need to change all those things. Because these, yes, so that is why some of it we want, I would like a set date for election, but we have to change the constitution for a set date. So now, I will not hear, why say I heard my friend who said, I feel to call it. And then I hear my next friend say, well, call it no. No, I don't really like that. Because everybody, it's like we're playing with big people. We need to get this level, everybody wants a level playing field. Everybody wants a level playing field. But I'm not concerned about all those senior boys, senior parliamentarians, you know. You see, those are coming after. We have to set it. So we do have to, on my old bed and when I lie down, I don't want to have to come and talk. Nobody talking about reform. We want to set the trend. So when the rest coming after is already set. So let's make the change. Yes, some people say 20 years too late. Better late than never. Let's start that. We need to start this change. So when it comes to certain power and certain, everybody have their followers. Everybody have their followers. Everybody have their followers. So now stop using your followers, because I know none of my friends outside there. None. None of them outside. None of them outside. Because they voted for me to come in the house and do it the right way. We're not going outside. None. None of them outside. None. And maybe 10 Marigot people outside. Maybe 10. And all of them maybe retire. Maybe all 10 alone outside, all of them retire. And then maybe not even living in Marigot. No, it doesn't matter afraid. We thinking differently. We're going to think differently. This is one Dominica. This demonizing way of politicking. When the letter was leaked 17 years ago, the famous letter, his recommendation that was made, the people that made the recommendation on the commission, you ever hear them speak? They have integrity. They don't have time to pull along your brothers. They put the recommendation, they finish with that. You never hear them speak and pull along nobody. The letter leaking. All the people just leaking letters because they want to know the correct thing is done. Yes, everybody right, I know they write against me. You don't have no opposition leader, it's okay. But we have one country. We have one country. It has one country, no? We have one country. We don't hold, a lot of us hold in malice. When it comes to the point, everybody have here, everybody moving, everybody. You see, there's some movers and shakers that cause people to do things. And it's okay. Everybody make mistakes, everybody do what they have to do. But we hold in too much malice. All that thing that is written, Jesus, that you betrayed Jesus, all this thing is written. You're supposed to expect that. So, but you have to just forget about that, and we have to move the country. Move on. We don't have time to waste. We have a country to build. This noise about electoral reform. When you have Donald Trump, the honorable Prime Minister, President of the United States, passing legislation, rumors, you have war in Israel, you have war in, and those things are going to affect us. We'll be talking about, I should be asking Honorable Roland Roy about my roading Captain Bruce. I come in and talking about electoral reform. I come in and ask about electoral reform. Electoral reform, basically, according to a guy I gave a ride this morning, but that is just to keep party and put party in power. I say no. According to who you put in there, they don't work in your interest, so you have to put the rest person in there. But anyway, that's how you're watching it. But we need to more bread and butter issues. So you see this legislation, we're going to start it. Because I'm not going to stay too long on that, it's already 17 years. We're going to start this, and anything, all I know, I want to put on record, I'm recommending and putting on record, we need to start it. And I'm going to be one of those who go to start it. Although my father started it and started noise, I'm going to start it for him properly in the house. So we're going to start this resolution by passing this bill today, and as we go along, even 5 years, when the opposition win, they'll come and fix what they have to fix. I just say, we have to start it. And we have one, let's get this thing going, we have one, it's only one Dominica, people, one Dominica. One Dominica. One alone. And all of us here is Dominicans. Yes, my sisters have overseas, Trump will delete them over there. They've deleted them over there. So it have this thing about ordinary residents and on. That's for the age. That's about my pay grade. This ordinary thing and country thing. You see my sister? She come along and vote. And if she don't come now, nobody will taking her off the list until when she come now. And when she ready to come and reconfirm, she come and reconfirm. You don't force it, nobody off no list. She from Dominica. She had Dominica passport. I don't force no Dominican to tell them when to come. We have to watch this thing. We put in pressure because we try to put some political moves, but no, you have to watch the individual and the ordinary man. The ordinary man. People like me, I don't know how to say it, I know how to survive. That was enacted me through my father and my parents. I know how to survive. I born a survivor. So I don't feel, somebody got to feel sorry for me. Don't worry about Tony. Tony, okay, he will survive. He know what to do. But some people don't know what to do. Some people don't know. And that is the people that might feel sorry. You see, when I retire and I lie down on my bed, I don't want to see the younger one fighting to survive. So we have to set it. Let's set that, start the bill, pass the resolution, let's go as we go along, we'll fix that. I thank you.
But Honorable Charles, I didn't see you read notes. Yes, Honorable Melissa Popon Scared.
Thank you. Allow me to
You may
refer to my
proceed.
notes.
Yes, permission granted.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise energized this morning because you know what? It's a historic day in Dominica. And so far here, Mr. Speaker, I am very happy to see the unanimous support that we are getting today in this honorable house. I want to commend the member of Marigot, Lennox Anthony, to take a page from your book because you are putting people before politics. And this is what we're here to do, Mr. Speaker, to protect the rights and the freedoms of the citizens of Dominica. Mr. Speaker, this issue before the House, these bills before the House, it's not an issue because we resolve it today. But it's an issue that I have lived, have worked through, and I have fought. And so it is something that is deeply personal to me. So allow me over the next few minutes, Mr. Speaker, to tell you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about what this means for the Commonwealth of Dominica, but specifically my constituency of Rosa Central. And I want the opposition to hear me out clearly this morning. You see, because over the years, Mr. Speaker, the opposition, particularly the UWP, would have people believe that electoral reform is some type of magic wand, that once it is waved, they will magically gain victory at the polls. They want Dominicans to think that the reason that they have been losing election after election, cycle after cycle, is because they have somewhat been cheated by Labour, or the playing field somehow has been tilted, and that they were at a disadvantage. And to make themselves feel better about the beating that we give them at the polls, they want people to believe that they have been wronged. But let me state this unequivocally, that electoral reform will never make UWP win elections. Not in this lifetime. And even though they got everything they wanted in these bills, we didn't get everything we wanted neither. There's a compromise, you have to give and take. But even if that they were to get everything that they wanted in these bills, there's no amount of reform that can fix a party that has no vision, no leadership, and not even connection to their own people, Mr. Speaker. You see, the thing is, the people of Dominica have rejected them time and time again. And it is not because of this so-called rigged system, but because they are offering nothing of substance. They have no hope, they have no plans, not even for the people who support them. And so this is why day after day, Mr. Speaker, in my constituency office, in the Labour House, we have people, our teams working here. Day after day, we're getting people from the UWP side who are coming in and saying that they're fed up. They are fed up. And they are coming across to Labour. They're sitting there, they're getting gray hairs, waiting for them to get their act together. And nothing of substance for them to believe in a solid party that can do something for them and change for the betterment of themselves and the people. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, it's the same old circus and the same old clowns of leadership that we see. But, Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that every single party has contested elections on this same system, and every party has come into government on this same system. I'm a walking voters list, Mr. Speaker. I carry it everywhere. I know my constituents back to back. I know my streets, my homes, my people. I know them name by name. It's like I have a doctor's file on everybody, Mr. Speaker. Because this is how I have combed and I have dissected my voters list of Rosa Central. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to take you back to 2019 when I first entered the political arena. The first thing I did was to print a voters list. And I combed that voters list. And I was shocked to see hundreds of people who had long been deceased were still on that register. But I didn't sit back and complain. I took action. I purchased the death certificates of these people, and I handed it to Electoral office. And this was in an effort so that they were able to clean that list before we went to the polls during that year, Mr. Speaker. And I say this to say that, Mr. Speaker, we all have a duty and a responsibility to draw to the attention of the Chief Elections Officer if there are any dead people on our list, or if there are, in some cases, illegal registrations. You can query that, like I've also done, Mr. Speaker. And that is what leadership looks like. That is what accountability and transparency looks like. And this is what responsible citizens do. But, Mr. Speaker, they don't want to do the hard work. They want to cry foul. They want to protest. And they are the ones who are also, they are the ones who have been complicit in the inflation of our voters list. But Mr. Speaker, when people point their finger at you, you have to look at where the three fingers pointing back, you know. It is at them, guilty as charged. So I am very excited about what is happening today before the House, because in addition to that, in Rosa Central in particular, I've also picked up names of people who do not, on addresses that do not even exist. Mr. Speaker, an open lot. A lot which had never been developed, ever. It's not to say that Hurricane Maria destroyed a home and it's flat now, but they were registered before. An open lot with nothing, Mr. Speaker. And the famous one we always laugh about in the office, new names registered on the step, to a step. No house, but you have a slew of names registered on a step, to a step. And I'm not talking about vagrants, you know, to say a vagrant, okay, sleeping on a step. No, 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 no. These are hard-working people. We know who they are. We track them down. We are like CIA agents in Rosa Central, you know. We know where they are. We know where they came from. They came from the east. Some came from Marigot. Mr. Speaker, people who had never in their life slept a day in the city of Roseau, registering. Because the thing is, to register in a constituency, you have to prove that you have been living there for at least 3 months. So, Mr. Speaker, that is why we want electoral reform. We, Rosa Central, we need it. We want to clean that list. We want to see all those people who say that they have been registered. I mean, it's ridiculous, on the alleyway, a wall, a window in the sky. We want them to come forward. Come and show electoral office where you lived. Come and be counted. We want them to come, Mr. Speaker. Because in section 49 of the Registration of the Electors Act, it states that they will have to come and confirm where they live, in the alleyway, on a rock. Let them come and tell us on the step that they live, and they get up every day and go to work because they're hardworking people of this country. And while we're on the topic of deception, I want us to deal with another lie, Mr. Speaker. And it is the absolute nonsense that Labour wins elections because of voters residing out of Dominica. They want people to believe that Dominicans overseas should have no say in the future of their homeland. And I say to them, shame on you, and shame on you. Because many of their residents, actually, many of their followers are resident in the US. They have gained citizenship in the US. And they know that when elections are called, if they happen to be in Dominica or another country, they can still cast their vote. They can still cast their vote by what they consider an absentee ballot. They are still counted, Mr. Speaker. And so, as a citizen of every country, it is your right, and nobody should be able to take that away from you. This is why, with the new bills, we also saw it fit to remove the restriction to vote by anyone who has been living outside of Dominica for 5 years or more. Because as long as you are legally registered to vote, nothing and no one should prevent you from being able to vote. And that is what we are doing here, Mr. Speaker. We are protecting the rights and the freedoms of our people here in Dominica. Because, Mr. Speaker, I'm part of a government and a party who treats all Dominicans, whether they live here or abroad, we treat them the same. I'm part of a government and a party who understands that many of these overseas voters once lived here, and they helped build this country by their sweat and their sacrifice, and that they have every right to have a say in the future of their homeland. And what does the opposition want? They want them to strip them of that right. They want to tell them that because that they live abroad, they're not Dominican enough. Mr. Speaker, I think this is disgraceful. and we will not stand for it. But while they waste time complaining, Mr. Speaker, we are working, we are building. You know, this government never stops doing and fulfilling on the promises that we have made to the people. And I want to tell them what real leadership looks like. Right now, Mr. Speaker, as you know, we're soaring with tourism. We had an inflation of people here this year, and of course, next year, we are going to see a lot more on our shores. Mr. Speaker, in fact, we don't even need to remove that 5 years, because you know what? Diasporans are telling me they placed on their calendar, they're here for Carnival, and they're here for Creole Festival. Twice a year, they come in here, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, right now, we are building, in my ministry, we have 11 housing sites under construction, 11 under the MMC project. And we are seeing the light at the end of that tunnel, because in a couple weeks, 2 of these sites will be handed over. So 37 families in Scott's Head and Eggleston will receive a beautiful, hurricane-resilient home with a concrete roof, open space, shatterproof windows, backyard porch, beautifully painted. Will be handed over these homes very soon. And when we talk about opportunity, Mr. Speaker, you know the government is always selling land to people who want to develop themselves. We've been very aggressive lately, and there are a number of people, young people, who want to invest in their future. They want to own a piece of Dominica. They have been buying land at subsidized rates, Mr. Speaker, from the government, buying land to build. Young people in 21, where I just did one for 21, another one passed through cabinet on Tuesday, 31-year-old who wants to build, buying land to invest and own a piece of Dominica and build their future, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are not just talking progress, we are delivering it. We are not just giving hope, we are making dreams come true here. And so, let the record reflect that this government, we do not fear electoral reform, we welcome it, we need it, and we embrace it. Because we know that there's no amount of reform that will change one fundamental truth, that the people of Dominica know leadership when they see it, and they know failure when they see it. There's no amount of finger pointing, and no amount of crying foul, and no amount of excuse-making that will save this lazy opposition from their own incompetence, and like we have been seeing, even their own demise. And so it is clear that UWP does not want reform, electoral reform. They demanded electoral reform. They walked the streets, Mr. Speaker. Every Wednesday, we had the Wednesday walkers making noise in people's head in Roseau, demanding electoral reform in our streets. But Mr. Speaker, now they are getting it. What are they doing? They're protesting outside again, making more noise, acting the fool. But we must not forget when we came here in Parliament in 2017 to seek to effect the electoral process. And what they did, they started firing gunshots right outside this honorable house. 8 years later, we are here again today, Mr. Speaker. But this time, Parliament will pass these bills into law. It's comprehensive set of measures to modernize our electoral process. And this is a historic day, Mr. Speaker. So I say, let's get on with it. Let's bring the reform. Let's update the laws. Let's confirm our registrations, and let us demand accountability. Because at the end of it all, there will only be one outcome. Labour will continue to stand tall, and they will continue to fall flat. You see, because the people of Dominica know who they can trust. The people of Dominica know who has their back. The people of Dominica know who cares and means well for them, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, in Rosa Central, we stand for reform, not rebellion. We are ready to roll. Let me big up my constituents who are here today, Vado, Samantha Robinson, and our soldiers who are here. Thank you for supporting this. Mr. Speaker, in Rosa Central, they say we're like sharks. That's what they call us, because we're fearless and we don't look back. And so, my team, we're ready. We're ready to roll. we're ready to attack that new voters list. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, I recognize Honorable Alfred.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the people of the Casus constituency with a short presentation to support the registration of the Electoral Act registration process. Mr. Speaker, having worked as an election officer, may I refer to my notes a little because I have some facts, some little...
Yes, permission granted.
Wrong thing, man.
Yes.
As having worked as an election officer for more than 20 years, I can confidently say our electoral process before this reform was a very reliable one, a very fair one, a very free one, a very free from fear one, a very wholesome process, which made it simple for all those who were of voting age to register and vote. When the Dominica United People's Party, under Honorable, I'm trying to read in my notes now. I said, when the Dominica United People's Party, under Honorable Frank Barron, won in 1960, this electoral process was very reliable, very fair, very free from fear, and a very wholesome process, which made it simple for all those who were of voting age to register and vote. At that time, Mr. Speaker, losers conceded, they congratulated the winners, and we moved on. Mr. Speaker, when the Dominica Labour Party, under Honorable Edward Oliver Leblanc, won in 1961, 1966, and 1970, this electoral process was a very reliable one, a very fair one, a very free one, a very free from fear one, and a very wholesome process, which made it simple for all people of voting age to register and to vote. At that time, losers conceded, we congratulated winners, and we moved on. I come in, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when the Dominica Labour Party, under Honorable Patrick Rowland John, won in 1975, this electoral, the teacher are talking here, so if you catch the rhyme, you can join the rhyme. This electoral process was a very reliable one, a very fair one, a very free one, a very free from fear one, and a very wholesome process, which made it simple for all those who were of voting age to register and to vote. At that time, Mr. Speaker, losers conceded, congratulated winners, and we move on. Mr. Speaker, when the Dominica Freedom Party, under Honorable Mary Eugenia Charles, won in 1980, 1985, and 1990, this electoral process was a very reliable, a very fair one, a very free one, a very free from fear one, a very wholesome process, which made it simple for all those who were of voting age to register and to vote. Mr. Speaker, at that time, losers conceded, congratulated winners, and we moved on. Mr. Speaker, when the United Workers' Party won under Honorable Edison James in 1995, the electoral process was very reliable, very fair, very free from fear, and a very wholesome process, which made it simple for all those people who were of voting age to register and to vote. At that time, Mr. Speaker, losers conceded, congratulated winners, and we moved on. Mr. Speaker, when the Dominica Labour Party won under Honorable Roosevelt Douglas in 2000, this electoral process was still very reliable, very fair, very free from fear, and a very wholesome process which made it simple for people of voting age to register and vote. At that time, the losers had difficulty to concede, to congratulate winners, and losers found it hard to move on. Mr. Speaker, when the Dominican Labour Party under Honorable Roosevelt Skerrit won in 2005, this electoral process was very reliable. It was very fair. It was very free. It was very free from fear. A very wholesome process which made it simple for all people of voting age to register and to vote. Mr. Speaker, at that time, losers did not concede. They did not congratulate the winners, and losers could not move on. Therefore, the Dominican Labour Party continued to win elections under the Honorable Roosevelt Skerrit within an electoral process which was very reliable, very fair, very free from fear, and a very wholesome process which made it simple for all those people who are of voting age to register and to vote. Mr. Speaker, over all these years, the only thing that has changed was that the United Workers' Party, try as hard as they could not win a general election again in the Commonwealth of Dominica within an electoral process which was very reliable, very fair, very free from fear, and a very wholesome process which made it simple for all those people who are voting age to register and vote. Mr. Speaker, I've said all this to say that this reform exercise should not be looked at as fixing something that was broken. Our system worked well for all these years. When their party won, it was reliable, free from fear, and wholesome. But when their party lost, everything changed. Mr. Speaker, this reform activity will not be the road to a win to our losers, as we've heard. Neither will it be a thing to fix political parties that seems like jigsaw puzzle pieces in a box, and they're waiting for the reform to be the final piece to put together. No. Mr. Speaker, the process will not be fixing anything that is broken. It will, however, enhance the process. Electoral reform is not a transformation process, but an enhancement process, a modernization process. Mr. Speaker, I am all for this electoral reform. This modernization process, I'm all for it. Because this has been ongoing for history, in an effort to make voting easier and not more complicated. Once upon a time, you had to be a 21-year-old man, and your people had to have wealth, either land or plenty money, and then you could vote. We had electoral reform, and that changed. Once upon a time, women couldn't vote. We had electoral reform. Now women are allowed to vote. Once upon a time, adult suffrage was at 21. When it was dropped to 18, voting age, you can vote. So, Mr. Speaker, even revisiting of constituency boundaries was a part of the process. You can check the history, that's not for that this morning. But I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, every time there was a process of reforming the electoral system, it was to make voting easier for people. I do not understand why this reform, some people seem to want to make it more difficult for people to vote. Because, Mr. Speaker, the basic objective of electoral reform is to improve voters opportunities, and to make it easier for people to exercise their right to vote, and to address aspects of the electoral process that fails to serve in a democratic process. Mr. Speaker, our electoral process had very little to be addressed in these areas. And therefore, some people kept the conversation on electoral reform going on and roundabout because they were trying to fix something that was not broken. So they dismounted the process and they mounted it back and they said, there's no significant change. Let's come up with that. There's no significant change, so let's come up with our next thing. And we just are going on and on and on. So, Mr. Speaker, the time has come to wrap up this part of the conversation. Mr. Speaker, electoral reform is not about a competition between the Dominican Labour Party and any other party. Okay? It is about respecting the right of every citizen to vote for the candidate of their choice and making it as simple as possible for citizens to exercise that right. We heard that. Mr. Speaker, let me give you a little experience. I went to an electoral training workshop in 2016. We were placed in groups to think about the simplest way in which we can think people should register and vote. Most people agree generally that as long as you can come, prove your age, you have an ID, or you've been an older significant person in the community to say, yes, I know that person and he's over 18, you could register and then you're ready to, you could vote. But Mr. Speaker, when groups came up with all kinds of weird ways to vote, some say any mark by the symbol. Some say put the candidate picture too by the symbol. But yeah, my group, Mr. Speaker, my group said put a big red box and put a big blue box and put a bin. Give voters two beads, a red bead and a blue bead, and they go inside the thing. If you're voting for your color of your party, you put your red bead in the red box, and the bead you didn't use, you put it in the bin. Mr. Speaker, that was some real silly, you know. But we tried so hard to remove everything that could be a barrier to voting because we understood the importance of voting despite limitations in literacy and anything else. We understood the importance of voters exercising their rights to vote as long as these people are registered to vote. Mr. Speaker, we tried so hard. And sometimes when you try too hard, you become ridiculous. Mr. Speaker, I could take half of the day there speaking about the process. But I want to talk a little bit about the ID card. I'm all for the ID card, Mr. Speaker. I'm all for it. I embrace the ID card. I'm saying to myself, the way things were, we could have asked people to bring a picture ID and we would. We didn't have to go spend all that money and do all that thing. We could have asked people to bring but we agree for the voters' ID. Mr. Speaker, that will address a lot of things. Because before, people who work at the polling station, they knew everybody, but now that's different. People move to work, fellas come up with their girls, girls come up with their person, and so the ID card will address that, yes. The ID card will address that part. Mr. Speaker, I'm also all for the confirmation process. Because by the end of the confirmation process, we will generally have a really clean list. The confirmation process is very simple. If your name is on the list already, Mr. Speaker, nobody can take out your name. You go to the place with an ID, you say who you are, and they check you. For me, it's going to be very easy. I'm just going to be saying, Octavia Alfred, I vote in A04, and I even know my number by heart, and we're good to go. So, Mr. Speaker, whatever electoral process involved, it is always about making sure voters exercise their right. We depend on people who work at the polling station. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, I jump in my notes. That is why, before I wrap up, I want to spend some time to say thank you to all the people who have worked in the electoral process. Because this is a very sensitive issue, and sometimes we take these people for granted, and sometimes these people themselves take themselves for granted. but this is a work that includes legal proceedings. So I say to the people who have worked for us in the electoral process as election clerk, registering clerk, I want to extend on behalf of the government a big thank you to you. And I say to you, cover yourself by doing it right, by doing it well, and by doing it correct. Mr. Speaker, before I end, I want to tell you, you see me, I already see the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good, when a person loses and they are ready to lose. The bad, and Mr. Speaker, if you lose by one again, now it comes to ugly. It comes to ugly now. And that's why I appreciate the people who work. I got experience. In 5 minutes, polling station, road full of people, burn her house, all kinds of things. Police going to take a children in house. That's what it is. That's why it's not a joke thing that we are dealing with there under this reform. Mr. Speaker, I also, before I end, I'm wrapping it up, I don't want to take too much long time, but I also want to say that there's research on something called election grief. Let me address that a little. Election grief. Because, Mr. Speaker, when people lost, there's a grief. That's not a joke. You can go read about it. When people lost, there's a grief that goes with it. And if you grieve for 5 years, you enter the next election with grief, and you become meaner, you become, it's not jokes, you know. So therefore, I want to encourage those people who are aspiring politicians to learn to deal with election grief while it is at the loneliness, sadness, and fatigue stage. Because when election grief moves to the high stage of anger and denial, it is dangerous. Therefore, I'm glad to, and it affects the whole country, you know. I'm glad where we are today. I'm happy for where we are today. I am sure the process will continue as we move forward. Only thing we can say, government only can control what government have over. Mr. Speaker, I said, making it as simple as possible to vote 18 times in this presentation, because that is what electoral reform is about. And for this reason, because it's going to make it easier for the process, I stand and I support the bill. I thank you.
Yes, Senator Henderson, you may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Seeking your permission to refer to my notes from time to time.
Permission granted.
Thank you, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise to give my contribution this afternoon, on the bill before this Honorable House presented. I wish to touch on a few points. It's not anything new. We have been discussing this for years, meeting, consultations, suggestions, committee gatherings, just meeting about this act, or this bill, actually. And we have come to the part where we debate. Mr. Speaker, we know that there are key inserts in the act where the conversation continues, the disagreement continues, the agreement continues. And Mr. Speaker, one of these parts is the voter's identification card. Mr. Speaker, Section 11 of the bill refers to voter's ID. I, for one, I welcome this as an ID, an appropriate form of ID for all voters in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Mr. Speaker, though, however, the section leaves up to chance what the prescribed form and prescribed information should be. Mr. Speaker, this piece of legislation should present the specification that the ID card should possess. So we shouldn't wonder what should be on the ID card. It should be specifically stated here. The name, of course, your name, your date of birth, your photo, fingerprint, a unique ID, or a key identifier for any issued ID. So, Mr. Speaker, we shouldn't wonder what the voter's ID should hold, or we shouldn't assume it should be specific. Mr. Speaker, this is a pertinent information which is excluded from the legislation. When passing laws, we should not have any ambiguity. We should be very clear so it avoids chaos and the constant back and forth and discussion on the very same thing. Mr. Speaker, another pertinent discussion which has been ongoing is the voters list. Mr. Speaker, well, I was going to say from us on this side, but from us, from the constituency of Marigot, for the majority of the constituency of Marigot, different associations holding prominence, you know, the Bar Association, Electoral Reform, Mr. Henderson, good morning, Electoral Reform Coalition, the different groups, Mr. Speaker. Re-registration seems to be the more appropriate suggestion for this voters list part of the bill. Mr. Speaker, we have seen it in the documents. We have also seen it in the recommendations from the consultant, the electoral reform consultant, Sir Dennis Byron, and we have heard it on the airways. It's a discussion, a continuous discussion, Mr. Speaker, and we opt re-registration over confirmation. Mr. Speaker, the proposed re-registration is to ensure that we have an accurate voters list. Allow everybody to re-register. Mr. Speaker, I don't understand why there's a strong opposition to allowing the re-registration. Mr. Speaker, the Dominicans who live here, those who live overseas, Mr. Speaker, the opportunity will present itself for, everybody to come home and re-register. You come to vote. Some people come more often than not, and some only come to vote. So this is your opportunity. Come and see Granny. Come and see. I haven't seen some of you in a while. Come in, come to re-register. The confirmation process doesn't allow for this to happen. Mr. Speaker, we want to ensure that people participating in the election process, they do have a real say in the governance of the country. Mr. Speaker, people living overseas who come to vote, they get tickets and, a little spending money, a little good time. Mr. Speaker, and I found that to be, we speak about Dominicans exercising their franchise while living overseas. Mr. Speaker, case in point, the snap election of 2022.
Yes, hold on. Are you standing on a point of order? Well, you have to state you're standing on a point of order.
Speaker, the member is imputing improper motive, saying that persons overseas are given tickets and monies in order to come to vote. The member is saying that overseas individuals, the member is imputing that people who reside overseas are receiving tickets and money in an effort to come and vote, and that is imputing improper motives, Mr. Speaker.
So, member, are you saying that?
Mr. Speaker, so let me clarify. So if you allow me to clarify my case in point,
Yeah,
and it will clearly explain to the honorable member what I'm saying. So the snap elections of December 22, Mr. Speaker, nobody.
Hold on. You need to deal with the matter. He stood up on a point of order, so he must deal with the point of order. Are you saying what he said you are saying? I do not want to repeat it. So if you said that, is it a yes, you said that, and that's what you want to say, and then I'll tell you to withdraw?
Okay, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah.
I stated that to explain something further, but I'll withdraw this
statement. Yeah, you need to withdraw it.
I'll withdraw this statement, Mr.
Okay.
Speaker.
Move on.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, moving on. So the snap election of December 2022, I didn't see, I was here, but I didn't see any Dominicans coming in to exercise their franchise that year because, the election, the opposition, the United Workers' Party did not participate. The independent candidates present here and others participated. But somehow there was no reason for all Dominicans who normally exercise their franchise over the years, they didn't feel the need to exercise the franchise then. And this, to me, Mr. Speaker, it kind of, create a question about the voters list, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, if you allow me to continue, this is a question that would kind of ask about the re-registration. Do you exercise your franchise all the time or just sometimes? Mr. Speaker, Section 49.2, where an eligible voter must apply to have his or her registration confirmed, Mr. Speaker, this process, it doesn't really specify here. I would want to, understand how this is done. Is everybody coming home to do this? Are we going to them? Because if you come home to vote, this should be easy for you to come home to do. Mr. Speaker, let's for argument's sake, if you're coming home to vote, if you're coming to re-register, you're coming to confirm, you should be doing it here in Dominica. Yes, I can, very well, very well, very well. Mr. Speaker, let's for argument's sake say that the majority in this House votes for the piece of legislation approving confirmation of voters. I note here that Section 49 refers to the confirmation of registration may be carried out by means of the technology-enabled voter registration system. Mr. Speaker, does this mean that the system, the confirmation process will only happen if the system is implemented? Because there's no specific details in the bill that says when this will be done or how long after the passing of the bill that this will be implemented. Mr. Speaker, I am one who believes in, I welcome technological improvement, and improving our voting process will be one for Dominicans to benefit well within our rights. Mr. Speaker, I've noted here that there's no timeline for the implementation, which simply means that the election process will not be free or fair if this is not implemented. My curiosity made me look at different voters' management solutions, Mr. Speaker, and the registration systems, just to get a feel of what the next election should look like in Dominica, because we're improving and we're bringing in new technologies. Is it me, or do all voters' registration systems possess biometric identification? Those I've read about, I might be wrong, but those I've read about, I've seen biometric identification as one of the key technological improvements in the system. The technology will improve our electoral process when it is implemented, especially one which possesses the biometric identifier, which I notice is not part of the voter's ID implementation process. Mr. Speaker, the recommendations that we receive from the electoral consultant, I know that we can't take all the recommendations into consideration, but Mr. Speaker, there are key pertinent recommendations which will enhance our electoral process, which will not be taken into consideration. And this has to do with the biometric identification.
I rise to bring the debate to an end. The opposition. Wait.
Yes, but you, Honorable Paris, you didn't stand up. I saw Honorable Pinard standing up, and he sat back down, and the AG stood up to wind up the debate. So, Honorable AG, Honorable AG said, the Senator said you are standing, let's allow her to speak and wind up the debate. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Again, I'm going to caution members, if you want to speak, stand and rise on your feet. No, honorable members, I explained to you once in a training what happened in a budget debate where members were playing cat and mouse. And I told you in the training, I suffered from that. So, I'm going to allow Senator Victor to speak on the matter, and just after that, if no one stands up, the Attorney General can proceed immediately. So, Senator, rise on your feet. We'll switch to Honorable Senator Henderson. So it's either we want to debate or we don't want to. No cat and mouse game here.
Good morning, well, good afternoon to all. I rise to give my contribution to the long-awaited electoral reform bills. As we address these parliamentary sitting, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to kindly ask permission to refer to my notes here and there.
You may proceed.
As we are all aware, the talk of electoral reform began sometime after 2005 general elections. We have experienced some roadblock here and there. It has been the airways ever since. We have had 4 general elections ever since. But I would like to congratulate my people of Dominica for their consistency in ensuring that this is before this house today. And I would like to tell them whether they may feel that it's not up to their satisfactory level, but the most important part that it is here, it has started, and they should rest assured it's only the beginning. The most important part of all this that is here before this house. The electoral reform process is crucial to ensure elections are fair, transparent, and accessible. The improvement to electoral legislation is not only the responsibilities of parliamentarians or politicians, it is the responsibility of every Dominican citizen. This legislation should never be influenced to the advantage of any political party, whether the government or the opposition. To ensure that there is effective electoral legislation begins with the proper registration of electors and maintenance of voters' lists. To begin this, I believe that public awareness is something we should uphold. With public awareness, campaigns can be held to educate proposed electors on the qualifications and disqualifications. With the registration of the electors bill being passed, there are a few things I would like to highlight which was placed in the bill. A person is qualified for registration as an elector for a polling district if the person is a Dominican citizen, a colonial citizen who had resided in Dominica for a period of not less than 12 months immediately before qualifying date. 2, a person may not be registered as an elector for more than 1 polling station, district, voter identification card. Though I feel this section is a bit vague, I rest assured that it's only the beginning, and like any other bill, it is subject for enhancements. Number 4, no DC's individual name should be on the published list, which comes out at the end of September every year. Given my support to these key points in the registration of electors process, there are a few questions I would like to ask Mr. Speaker. 1, what are the steps placed to ensure that electors do not register in more than 1 polling district? 2, if an elector knowingly registers in more than 1 polling district with the intention of voting in both districts, what methods are in place to ensure this fraudulent scheme is blocked? Is there any punishment for said elector? Number 3, when an elector's vote is transferred to another polling district, how do we ensure that their name is removed from the previous polling district? Number 4, how often do we clean and update the voters list to ensure that deceased people are no longer on the list? These questions arose after realizing that all these points are important and needed. However, we need to ensure that the implementation is on point. We cross all our T's, dot all our I's. One of the key aspects of the registration of electors process is to ensure effective, non-biased electoral reform is cleaning and updating of voters' lists. The focus of electoral reform is ensuring that the voters' lists are regularly updated and cleaned to remove ineligible voters. That is people who are deceased, those who have migrated, or individuals disqualified due to legal reasons. Though sometimes these may cause challenges, where an elector's name may wrongly be removed, a clear and transparent system will dissolve all challenges. To end, I will repeat, it is very satisfying to be here to witness and be part of the start of the long-awaited electoral reform process. Electoral reform process. I am, 80% in support of it. The 20%, the 20%, there's room for improvement. So I am not fully against it because that's what we have been asking for. For almost 20 years? We have been asking for electoral reform. It is finally here. And I would like to tell my people on the outside, rest assured, it is only the beginning.
Yes, Senator, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I would like to have leave to refer to...
Permission granted.
Right. Mr. Speaker, other parliamentary colleagues, good morning. Well, it's afternoon now, sorry. Section 33(2)(a), Constitution of the Commonwealth of Dominica, speaks to the qualifying criteria that provides for an individual to be duly registered. In short, these qualifications are as follows. Person is eligible to be registered if he or she is a Commonwealth citizen, has attained the age of 18 years or upward, as a resident Commonwealth of Dominica. Subsection B of that same section stipulates that every person who is registered or who is duly registered in any constituency shall, unless he is disqualified by Parliament from voting in that constituency in any election of representatives, be entitled so to vote. Largely, Mr. Speaker, this is a premise on which my parliamentary colleagues on the other side has tabled the idea that once someone has met the qualifying criteria to be registered, and they are so duly registered, that their name should remain on the list. They have put forward a number of ideas and responses to challenges, stating that a citizen of Dominica, or that the citizen of Dominica will not be unduly disenfranchised once they have been duly registered and confirmed on the register of electors. Now, Mr. Speaker, firstly, the assertion that the name on a register, or that names on the register, can only be removed if, one, the person dies, person has requested removal of their name, the person fails to reconfirm, and if the person, subsequent to their registration, has been disqualified by any law. I would like to use the AG's words. It's a fallacy. It's not true. A name can be deleted if a person renounces his or her citizenship. A person's name can be deleted if the person is found to be under the age of 18 years. But exactly. I love this, this unanimous agreement. I like it, Mr. Speaker. We're moving nice. If the person is no longer a resident or domicile in Dominica, their name can be also removed. Once the information becomes known to the chief elections officer, she is obligated to remove the name. Yes or yes? Cool. In fact, there are many provisions in the proposed Registration of Electors Act and the Registration of Electors Regulation that require the chief registering officer to delete names from the register, including a failure to continue meeting residency. Follow me, Mr. Speaker, as we touch on a few sections. We're not going to read them because we've read that before, right? Section 10, 1A and B, Section 12, A and B, Section 13, 3B, Section 13, 4A, 2, Section 15, 3A, 2, Section 15, 3B, Section 21, 3, Section 27, Section 36, 1, E and F, and Section 38. But teacher asked me to read. Regulation 6 defines a place of ordinary residency. And Regulation 7.1 provides for house-to-house visits to a certain what? Don't worry, I'll help you. Residency. Why would you need to do house-to-house if you're not trying to ascertain and confirm residency? So yes, your residency, according to the present legislation, will affect your ability to vote. Mr. Speaker, we're going along nicely on the journey. Additional responses from the other side has also cited, and we heard the AG mentioning it this morning again, House of Assembly Elections Act, Chapter 2.1, Section 27.2, which provides that every person whose name appears upon the official list of electors for any polling district shall be entitled to vote in that polling district, notwithstanding that he is not resident in that polling district upon polling day. The other section of it is to see Clause 226.2, the House of Assembly Elections Bill 2024, Registration of Electors Act, where a person who is registered as an elector for a polling district has ceased to reside in the polling district, he shall not, on the account, cease to be qualified to be registered. Mr. Speaker, in short, even if, this is what my colleagues are saying on the other side, even if an elector is not a resident at the address and in the constituency for which he or she is registered, he is still entitled to vote in that constituency. And he cannot be lawfully prevented from voting. And Mr. Speaker, to be quite honest, I don't see a problem with that. That's totally fine. But it's disingenuous. Why? Because it is a conflation of two separate issues. It's a conflation of two separate issues. How so, Mr. Speaker? Because moving from one constituency in Dominica to another constituency cannot be equated to leaving the jurisdiction and living outside. It cannot be equated. It's not the same thing. Mr. Speaker, I know Mr. Speaker, you're not required to be a legal luminary to understand and to be able to read a little bit of law, right? I know we have doctors of law in here, but you're not required to be a legal luminary to understand two separate sections of law. One is the letter of the law that describes the actual literal translation of the text, the legal text. We're taking it on the face of that, right? No, you don't have to stop going to law school, but we can understand that not just because you go to law school, you're the only one that can read it. The spirit of the legislation, Mr. Speaker, speaks to something different. The spirit of the legislation speaks to what the framers intended for it to mean, even if there are inconsistencies and imperfections in the legislation. The spirit of the legislation says you have to look at what the framers were trying to achieve when they put this piece of legislation together. So, Mr. Speaker, what were the framers intending? What were the framers intending, Mr. Speaker? What were we intending to achieve when they created this part of the legislation which is still in our Constitution? The election of representatives. I heard the AG in his presentation speaking of the right to vote. True. But they vote for what? It's the right to vote for the selection of representatives. Follow me, Mr. Speaker. We're moving nice. Representatives are chosen to advocate for their constituents and for their interests, allowing the voices of their citizens and constituents to be heard, rather than having every citizen vote on every issue every single time advancement needs to be had. Creates a group of people where diverse voices and diverse opinions can be held and heard at a central place, and representation can be made on their behalf. They form a body that reflects a diverse perspective and the needs of different groups. So, Mr. Speaker, knowing that, what were the framers intending? What were the framers intending? What were we trying to achieve? What was the spirit of the legislation trying to dictate? It was to ensure that the voters selecting representatives were doing so and were selecting representatives that can actively and effectively represent them. In order for you to do that, the framers created a three-pillar system upon which being qualified as a voter would rest. Follow me, Mr. Speaker. They were trying to ensure that in order for you to be a voter, you must meet and maintain your eligibility criteria. Because you cannot register to vote. You cannot register to vote unless you have met the criteria to be a voter. Letter. So one, Mr. Speaker, framers wanted to ensure that you are a consenting adult, responsible for yourself and able to clearly make decisions regarding your future, and that's why you needed to have attained the age of 18 years or older, which will never change. Number two, you needed to be a citizen. And why do you need to be a citizen? Because citizenship, Mr. Speaker, is what establishes who is considered to be a full member of the political system and who should actively participate in selecting representatives. And number three, it's a three-pillar system, Mr. Speaker. You needed to be resident. Why? Because residency ensures that those making the decisions of selecting representatives are the ones who are going to be living with the consequences.
Honorable Member, I see nobody have stood up and say anything, but you have stated the three criteria, but you did not mention being a citizen of the Commonwealth.
Mr. Speaker, I led with that, Mr. Speaker. Probably that's why they didn't raise, because they heard me mention and reference section 33(2)(a). They were listening, Mr. Speaker, but thanks for that.
So that's why I just pointed
Mr. Speaker,
that
the
out.
public listening, they heard me when I started the presentation by agreeing with the AG and referencing section 33(2)(a) of the Constitution. I can proceed? Thank you. Mr. Speaker, everyone would agree with me that, and you heard them a while ago, everyone is going to agree with me that children shouldn't be registered to vote. So while every citizen is important, and every citizen is valuable, and every citizen has a right, not every citizen can be registered, because you cannot register children. And if the mistake happens, a child's name should be removed. If somebody renounces their citizenship, I'm sure everybody would agree with me, they're no longer part of the political system. You no longer want to identify with us. Mr. Speaker, I've had family members who had to do that. The mother in Canada filed for them. The father in the United States filed for them. They can't have free citizenship, they give up Dominica. So, consequently, they can never be on our register. And everybody would agree with that. And I think that's fair. Right? The framers wanted to ensure that we didn't just register, become a voting member, get on the register, the list of registered, and leave the jurisdiction. So you know what they did, Mr. Speaker? They created a caveat. Speaker, the AG mentioned it a while ago, the Honorable AG mentioned it a while ago. A caveat, section 11(3) of the current legislation that states that the register of voters should not include citizens of Dominica who have been living outside of Dominica for a period exceeding 5 years. Right? A period, incidentally, that coincides with the stipulated duration within which our general elections are held. By the way, Mr. Speaker, that has been removed, as the AG said, it didn't survive. And we saw that response in a number of other correspondence. Mr. Speaker, the point I'm making here is that we talk often of how our ancestors fought and died for our rights to vote. But there's a reason why they did that. And it's not just an ordinary right. It's a right with purpose, and the purpose is for selecting representatives. So trivializing the issue of residency and making it, I can't remember the part of it, but not making it relevant. I didn't hear you say that. Not making it relevant is unfair to the process, and it does not add value, and it reduces the authenticity and validity of the electoral process. Why, Mr. Speaker? Because it's risk diluting the voice of citizens who actually live here. The critical importance of residency in the process of electing representatives is that the lived experience of citizens who reside here has tangible impacts. And I can give you an example, Mr. Speaker, because I've heard in the public space that we need to take this process seriously. We need to take the process seriously. Because you can't live in New York or Manhattan, come down to Dominica to vote, and go back, and call your pal up in Casus Bruce. And complain about the potholes in Manhattan because they cannot help you there. And that is a correct statement, because the selection, voting is about selecting representatives and living with the consequences of the decisions that your representatives make on your behalf. Mr. Speaker, residency promotes democratic legitimacy. Representatives derive their legitimacy from being chosen by the people they govern. Residency ensures the balance of interest. And while citizenship establishes membership in the national political community, residency determines where and how that political participation should be exercised. In ways, Mr. Speaker, that best align with the representation of the governed population. Mr. Speaker, I see your mic on. Would you like to talk?
Yeah, I didn't want to distract your flow, but strangers in the gallery, please put away your phones, because you're not supposed to be using your phone or taking pictures without the permission of the chair. So I'm not sure what you're doing, but put the phone away. Yeah. Continue.
Can proceed?
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is on this backdrop that we have made recommendations to the Special Parliamentary Committee advocating for the following amendments to the legislation being presented. To establish criteria for the removal of persons who are no longer resident in Dominica from the register of voters, and prohibit the confirmation or re-registration of persons not ordinarily resident in Dominica. This amendment ensures that, consistent with the constitutional right to vote for representation in the Parliament of Dominica, only those who are genuinely resident in Dominica are eligible to vote. Mr. Speaker, we talk about We talk about ordinarily resident. That is also defined in the current legislation being proposed, so I wouldn't go through it. Removal of non-residents. Come on, AG. That's not a gimmick and play me. Come on, AG. Regulation 6. Come on, man. You know better than that. Removal of non-resident persons from the register of electors. The Electoral Commission shall conduct periodic reviews of the register of electors to identify persons who are no longer ordinarily resident in Dominica. The Electoral Commission shall issue written notices to any person suspected of no longer being ordinarily resident. And Mr. Speaker, we heard the Minister for Housing talk about that. We cannot allow people to register on steps. That is not right. So I agree. We need to come and show where we're living on the step. I agree to that, Mr. Speaker. That was a very good point. Prohibition on the confirmation of re-registration of non-residents. It could go on, Mr. Speaker, but that was submitted, and we went on to talk about the offenses and the penalties and the enforcement of the oversight committee established by the independent Electoral Commission. Mr. Speaker, in future updating and modernizing, as the AG has tabled, that this is a live process that will continue to go on. In future updating and modernization and reforming, whether it be constitutional reform or additional electoral reforms, issues such as the review of our electoral boundaries should be looked at. Case in point, Mr. Speaker, we have constituencies that are imbalanced. We have constituencies where you go through 3 of them just in one road. So that definitely needs review. And of course, it is understood. This is not a one-time process. It will continue to be alive. Another thing that we should be looking at is ensuring that we're engaging our diaspora community in a sensible, sustainable way. Maybe they can vote as a bloc without risking diluting the votes of actual residents. No, but that's not what we're going to vote for. But Mr. Speaker, it will also give them an ease because they wouldn't have to lie about their residents. They wouldn't have to lie about their residents, and it will give them a meaningful way to participate, because we shouldn't water down the issue and create a them and us situation between our family overseas who are interested in the future of Dominica and the people who live here. Because selecting representatives is not a game. You know why, Mr. Speaker? Because the policy of your representatives dictates what happens to you when you go to the hospital. When we're struggling with waste management and garbage disposal, it affects the people who live here. And yes, all of us have a part to play. But there's a reason why we have representatives. So they can table our issues on that. Those issues don't affect our overseas friends as much as they do us here. And the people who live here should have a priority. Their voice should not be diluted. It should not be watered down. And at this critical juncture in our history, Mr. Speaker, that is not what we should be promoting. I pray God that we can take the chance and the time to do the right thing, to ensure that we build the capacity and we build authenticity into the process of selecting representatives. Not just for us, Mr. Speaker, because the true test and legacy of a man is being able to plant trees in whose shade he will never sit. Our children will inherit this, Mr. Speaker, and we should do it right. Thank you. Oh, I thought we was wrapping up.
Yes, Honorable Henderson, you may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know. I had gotten to accept the fact that so much have been said that I shouldn't speak. I shouldn't speak. But I've been moved. What I told. Yeah, I have been moved. So it's not spirit. I have been moved to speak because privately I spoke with Senator Paris. As a member of the special subcommittee of the parliament, I spoke to Senator Paris on this very same matter. But he had to pull me out. And then I heard him, he said, Senator Paris, if I see you building a wall somewhere and I watch it and I think it's koshy, I'm not going to question you. You're an engineer. You're an engineer. But when you come there trying to play lawyer, I must stand. I must stand. I have to rise. Because, I mean, my brother, boy, I was trying my best to contain myself. Because you see, all of us can read. All of us can read black letter law. But it is what that is behind the law, the jurisprudence, the thing people go to school to learn legally. That is where the debate is. So to take some paper, read section, subsection, and believe that qualifies you to speak with the authority. I'm not saying everybody can't do it, but it's with the authority you purport to have. I will bring the relevance to you because section 33(2)(a) is very, very clear. That is black letter law. That anybody can pick up and read and see what the Constitution guarantees us, the right to vote. The right to vote. And that right can only be restricted by the parliament that will tell you how you vote. But here's something I've been considering, you know. I tried to play a little lawyer last night when I was reading. And I started doing some research. And I'm saying, but hold on now. The current Registration of Electors Act, Chapter 203, Section 7, but that thing could be challenged and could have been stricken off. Because what Section 7, what it does is to say that if you're absent of Dominica for 5 years, you've lost your right to vote. But here's the thing. A constitutional right cannot be abridged without a compelling reason by the government. So if somebody had taken us to court for seeking to remove their name or preventing them from voting because they've been out of Dominica 5 years, I am confident that they would have won. Because if we go to Frank v. Canada, the Supreme Court case of 2019, it highlights the similar provision in our Constitution, Section 3 of the Constitution of Canada, 1982, the Charter of Freedoms and Rights. It clearly states that every citizen has a right to vote. And when Frank felt that he was out of the country for 15 years and they sought to prevent him from voting, he took the matter to the Supreme Court. And he won. Because the court recognized the sanctity of the right of every citizen in Canada to vote. And you come in talking about some ridiculous thing about residency. The Constitution provides for you to register to vote, you must reside in a constituency. It says that. So it provides for the residency to register, similar to the Constitution of Canada. Similar. But once you are registered to vote, that right is protected, and a politician can't just walk to the parliament and say he has the majority, and he's going to deny you of that right. This is what is at stake here. And the saddest part of all of this, it was the United States of America was formed in 1797. They had a constitution. They had some of the best legal scholars who took from the French Constitution in particular, and they sought to form a federation. But it wasn't until 1870 by the passage of the 15th Amendment that black people got the right to vote. Almost 100 years. And then I hear him, the senator, talking about the framers of the Constitution. But the framers of the American Constitution denied black people the right to vote. It is us now who have to ensure that we do not deprive people of their rights. And then women didn't vote until the 19th Amendment came. And then that was in 1960, I think, somewhere thereabout. And then when the 24th Amendment came, that's when people who were not paying taxes could vote. That is the history of voting. And in the United States in particular, there is a history of black people being denied the right to vote with all sorts of legal and sometimes non-legal weapons. So what we found is that voter ID cards was one, because black people didn't have voter ID cards. Elderly people who were voting one party didn't have voter ID cards. So they started putting restrictions and restrictions, reducing hours. And so voter suppression is a real thing. Even the last election, there's a big group of researchers who are convinced that voter suppression was involved in the last US election. And it may have affected the outcome. I am not making that case. I am also the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I'm not picking a battle with the US government and their system. But these are the facts. So what we are witnessing today, with some people seeking to fight in and making a case, you know the irony of that? People did that when they were fighting for their right to vote. But now we have an opposition party fighting for people to lose their right to vote. And young Senator Paris, that is where you want to be identified? Yes. Yes. You want the history to record you as coming to this parliament to deprive a Dominican citizen of a right to vote? Yes. Something that blood was shed for? Yes. That people fought for? People were deprived? And you come in with your section and your subsection playing lawyer? That's how Kotswai went to Jody Lagas.
Interpret, translate.
Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, you know my position. I do not translate, I withdraw. But, Mr. Speaker, we need to take this matter seriously. We have had observers upon observers. We've had the OAS, the Organization of American States. We've had the Commonwealth Secretariat. The biggest concern that they identified with, all of them, and I went through the reports from 2009, voter ID. But you know the problem I have with this? The problem I have with this is that you do not, as a matter of public policy, seek to create something just because somebody say you should. You create good policy because you're trying to correct something or you're trying to prevent something. Because the same observer missions, they were very clear in their reports that there were no cases of fraud. There were no cases where somebody said, "It's me that," and voted for that. And even if that was the case, the numbers were so insignificant, they could not have affected the outcome of an election. And today we're asking the state to invest over $5 million to ensure a voting system to solve a problem that does not exist. And that is the harsh reality we have today. We are doing this because we are trying to fall in line with the requests of the international community. It's plain and simple. It's not because no dead people voting. So unless you tell me you don't know everybody in Grand Bay, if somebody come and tell you they're from Monty and they come in and vote, and you seen that person on there who's Safa Munla, that person can just come down and vote. Withdraw. But Mr. Speaker, think about this. We, by our very nature, I grew up in St. Joe and I represent in Granby. They have something in common. All people like to migrate. Yeah. They like to migrate. Everywhere you go, you're seeing people from Granby and Central. If you go St. Thomas, you see them. You go Guadeloupe, anywhere you go Brooklyn, Atlanta, you see them. I mean, we have to also take that into account when we pass laws. We have to embrace our people, and you can't, in one hand, try to deprive people of a fundamental constitutional right, and on the other hand, come and embrace them and talk about diaspora and organizing your diaspora. And a fundamental right. If they choose not to exercise the right to vote, it is a matter for them. If they choose not to come home to confirm, it's a matter for them. But we cannot deprive them of that right. And if you were to, for example, somebody may want to challenge us, it is not unreasonable for the state to require you to come home to confirm. That's a reasonable exercise of good governance. And therefore, it is not impeding someone from exercising that right. But you cannot come to this house, my brother, a young progressive man like you, and to come reading the script of some political has-beens. I mean, let's be progressive here, man. There are things we would like to see in there. I agree with the AG, all of us not happy, and I agree with my good friend, Senator Victor, I agree with you. We all don't get everything we want in there. But to come and to give the impression that we're doing something unconstitutional, that is the charge, Senator Paris is making. Senator Paris is saying that this bill before us, the Registration of Electors Act bill, is at variance with our Constitution. That is what he's claiming, with no basis in law. But next time I try to build a house, I will go and read a book. I don't need no architect, nothing, I'll just read a book. Because that is not how you come to an intelligent debate, my brother. It's not because you can read and write. Everybody can read and write around here. But if you're going to make an argument and a basis, a claim in law, come properly, man. Come properly. We've had that debate before. The Constitution is very, very clear about this residency thing. And not because your good friend, former member of parliament and former leader, your former leader, speaks it in nice English, that it makes it correct. Exactly. Ordinarily resident. There is no such thing. The Constitution is clear. And to try to talk about all of this creativity in trying to talk about where you live and where you stay, I told him as well that legally, residence can be a legal definition to be determined by various factors. The right to remain, to return to a place. You leave your clothes there, you have your toothbrush there, you just go there, you get in a bill there, you're resident. Yeah, I'm not doing that anyway, One of my have. But the point is, all of these things can be determined, used to determine residence. So because nurse go by her daughter up in Florida, she come back, so she's not living in Granby then. Exactly. You want to tell me she's not living in Granby? I mean, the person's house, they have their bill there, they have that's their place. The same for you. I can't go and tell you you're not a Marigot man. I can't tell you you're not living in Marigot. Even if you're living in Maho, and everybody knows that. But I mean, let us look at these things, and if we want to go and delve into legal provisions, then let us use legal learnings. So, Mr. Speaker, I didn't intend to speak long. I just wanted to speak to that one issue. But I'll also go a little further to say, this is a progressive bill. This step to modernize our voting and electoral system. But I just remember, Senator Paris boy, I was advised this morning that I should not sound too upset in the house. So I was given a little admonition, and you caused me to go against that. So I'm going to speak very softly now, just like you, and try to be a little theoretical, a few tricks
I see you're very good at that, and maybe your days in AY help you well. And yeah, so I'm going to do like you. But I think it's a progressive piece of legislation, especially by modernizing the process. And I think with the voter ID cards, it's a progressive move. It will set aside a long-standing debate and something that I think you can easily set aside. There's more work to be done. I'm also satisfied that with the changing technologies, soon we might not even need voter ID cards to know is you that. With facial recognition, we can easily go to a station and stand there and your name will come up. So I mean, there is technology that's moving, and I think we are gradually moving to that place. But this is very, very expensive undertaking. Some of the provisions that we have come up here with is through consultation, and sometimes we forget that we had several months going around the country. So when I hear Senator Victor talk about consultation and public information, I'm not sure what else we could say. AG had lost his voice because of so many consultations, so many meetings we've had, engagements with the public. That process has been open. It has been, people have been available, encourage people to make comments, you know. Yeah, but take it easy now, man. I stand up to speak, man. Let me speak. I was sitting there quietly. I stand up and talk, man. Pass me, don't tell me about this wrap up. I'm not wrapping up. I want to speak. Now I feel the spirit moving in me. I'll speak. The people of Granby will be very happy to hear the power of speak. So, Mr. Speaker, I think it's a very progressive piece of legislation, but I think that the Prime Minister has made it clear that this is the first step in continuous improvement of our democracy. It's a young democracy. We have to look at the Constitution to see what constitutional changes that we may be able to consider at some point. But that conversation needs to continue. But for that to happen, we must all be determined among ourselves to determine what Dominica is going to look like. So I like one thing that was said by the two gentlemen distinguished gentlemen from Marigot, one the Member of Parliament and two the Senator, although senators don't have residence, but I think that he's from Marigot. The point is that we have to be very mindful of what Dominica we want to create for the future generation. And that is the kind of conversation we need to have. We look at best practices around the world, but we should also be satisfied for ourselves what we would like to see our Dominica look like. And it cannot be a Dominica where people want to fight when there's no reason to fight. When people believe that the only way they can get international attention and support and raise money is by making deba, fighting in the streets. That cannot be the way forward to developing a democracy. We need to talk. The majority will always have their way. But we want the minority to have their say. That's why the Prime Minister created a subcommittee that we could have engagements across the aisle, as it were, so that we can engage one another. But we also have to accept that when a government is elected, it is elected by the majority in our democracy, and it has the right to act on the behalf of the majority. And we cannot hold back the process unless, the only time I would fall out is if I see that people's rights are being infringed. If we are, instead of more rights for more people, we are doing less rights for less people. That is not the case here. We're expanding more rights to more Dominicans. And that's why I stand with this. And no matter how much noises that are made out there, we should be resolute in our stance, because what we're doing is the right thing for the Dominican people at home and abroad.
Yes, AG.
Mr. Speaker, I propose to wrap up very briefly. I think the Honourable Member for Granby covered most, if not all, of the salient points. I think we said what we've said. We've made it clear what our position is. I think we've also heard what other views are. I just wanted to touch on the issue of ordinary residents, because I was calling across to Senator Paris about it, and he made a reference to this issue of ordinary residents. I think the honourable member for Granby spoke appropriately in the advice that he gave to Senator Paris about not being misled or led astray by the news or whatever other ring from somebody outside of this. Because the reality is, because Senator Paris referred me quite properly to Regulation 6. Regulation 6, which is the primary place at which you will find reference to ordinary residents. It is also in Section 11 and I think 13, no, sorry, Section 12 and 13, I believe. But Regulation 6 is where it's referred to and where you were obviously referring to. And that is quite clearly headed in the shoulder note, but also in the head note for that. Residence requirement for registration, if I may take on the speech pattern of a former member of this House. So it is very clear that the ordinary residents that you and others attach your wagon to and make such bold statements about is, as I said in my opening statement, concerned with residence and not with voting or the right to vote. I don't know that anything I say will change the views of those who are in the mindset that they are. I understand that a few of them, the usual miscreants, are congregated around the various areas, causing mischief or attempting to, as they usually do. And so in that vein, Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House, and I don't think I need to say anything more. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
This concludes the debate, and I ensure that the opposition had their say. You know, that was, yeah. But well, I'm not commenting on that part, but I just ensure that they had their say, so everybody know everything is balanced. And also, I did not say it in the announcement, but although some members of the media did not ask for permission to attend, we wrote to them and extended an invitation to all media houses. So we extended an invitation to all media houses to attend this session because this session is so critical, a debate for many, many years, so we extended that. So let's proceed. It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Registration of Electors Act 2024 be read a second time. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Act 2024.
The bill will now stand committed to a committee of the whole House to be considered clause by clause. House is in committee. I have to report that the bill shortly and yeah.